Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. I am Nikhil Kumar. In today's video, we are going to talk about one of the most essential Kubernetes concept, that is namespaces. I will explain what they are, why we need them, and then we will get hands-on with some practical example and a visual breakdown. What is a namespace? Think of a namespace as a virtual cluster inside your Kubernetes cluster. Namespaces help you separate resources like pods, services, deployments into different environments or for different teams. By default, Kubernetes has a few namespaces like default where your workloads go if you don't specify a namespaces. Then we have a kube system where Kubernetes system components are live. Then there is a kube-public namespace. It is readable by all users, even unauthenticated one. Then there is one more called kube node lease. It is used for heartbeat communication between the nodes. Let's try to understand the namespace with the help of diagram. In this diagram, you can see that each namespace is like a box inside the Kubernetes cluster. Each box contains its own set of pods, services, and other resources. For example, in this we have a dev namespace. It is only used for the developers. Then we have a QA namespace that is only for the testers, and a production namespace that is for the production workloads. Even if two deployments have the same name, they won't conflict as long as they are in the different namespaces. Let's now create a few namespaces and deploy the pods in them. This is our Kubernetes cluster. First of all, let's try to get the namespace. For that, we have a command called kubectl get ns, stands for namespace. And we can see these are the four by default namespace are coming. And to create a namespace, we can use a command kubectl create ns and dev, that is a namespace name, and namespace got created. Let's verify that. We can see the dev namespace got created. Similarly, we are going to create another namespace called QA that is used by the testers. QA namespace also got created. Let's verify that. Now we have created two namespaces, dev and the QA. Now let's try to deploy a simple Nginx application in the dev namespace. We can use a command kubectl run nginx -image equal to nginx and -n, that is namespace, and specify the namespace name, that is dev. We can see the Nginx application got created. Let's try to verify that. Kubectl get pod. So right now we can see there is no pod with the name called Nginx. These are the pod which is being created by the deployment. Why we are unable to see the pod here in the default namespace? Because we have created a pod under the dev namespace. So to see the pod, we can use the namespace option with this command, kubectl get pod -n and dev. Now we can see Nginx application is running under the dev namespace. Let's try to create another pod under the QA namespace. For that, I'm going to use the same command with -QA and under the QA namespace. The pod got created. Let's verify that. -n QA. We can see the application or the pod is running under the QA namespace. Now let's try to access pod across the namespaces. For that, let me get into the pod in the dev namespace. We can use a command kubectl exec -it nginx -n dev -, and if we want to run some command, we can use this particular option, that is -, and the command curl nginx -qa .service .cluster.local. Right now we are unable to access this application with the DNS configuration because we haven't created any service for the same. Let me create a service. So we can use a command kubectl expose pod nginx -qa -port, that is a service port, -target port, that is our container port, and name is nginx -service under the namespace called QA. service got created under the namespace called QA for the pod nginx-QA. In our last video, I have showed this in very much detail. I would recommend to check it out first to get a better clarity on the services. Let's verify the service kubectl get service -n QA. We can see the cluster IP got created. Now let's try to access the application across the namespaces. For that, we can use a command kubectl exec -it nginx-n dev and the command that is curl nginx-service, that is our service name. Then we need to specify the namespace, that is QA. Then we need to specify the type, that is service. Then cluster.local. We can see our application, which is running under the QA namespace, is accessible from the dev namespace, and we can access it via nginx pod, which is running under the dev namespace. Now, if you want to create a pod under a specific namespace using the manifest file, you can use the metadata section. So let me copy this file, that is nginx pod.yml to nspod.yml. So here we can specify the namespace under the metadata, namespace and test. Right now test namespace is not been created. Let me create that as well. Let me create a namespace. We can create a namespace using the manifest file. In order to generate a manifest file, we can use a CLI command as well. So we can use kubectl create ns test -dry run equal to client -o YAML and the file name, that is test.yml. There is a typo, kubectl. Now we can see there is a file called test.yml, and this is the manifest file to create a namespace. So we can apply this and create a namespace. So kubectl create -f test.yml. The namespace got created. Kubectl get ns, and we can see the test namespace got created 5 seconds ago. In similar approach, we can create any of the manifest file for pod deployment or the service. Now we can create a pod using the manifest file and create it under the namespace called test. Let me apply that. Kubectl create -f ns pod.yml. The pod got created, but under the namespace called test -n test. We can see the nginx application is running under the test namespace. So namespace also help with role-based access, meaning you can give specific teams access only to their namespaces and restrict others. This is great for security and the isolation. That's all for namespaces in the Kubernetes. If this was helpful, hit that like button, subscribe for more content like this. See you in the next one.